Welcome to the Analog Gamers Podcast, a short podcast on board games and board gaming experiences. Here are your hosts.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Brent.
And I'm Frank. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. Today we are going to discuss auction games. The game that has auction in it that everyone is familiar with is Monopoly. Now, everybody's scratching their heads because they're going, we don't auction anything off of Monopoly. That's probably true. I've never met anyone who ever uses the auction mechanic. Well, maybe not anyone, but it's a rare person who uses the auction mechanic.
I've never met gamers who talk about Monopoly so much.
Well, if it wasn't for the fact that it was your favorite game.
It's not. Come on. I just have so many. All right, so the auction mechanic in Monopoly, where's that at?
So when you land on a property, if you do not buy it, it goes up for auction.
Right.
Actually, if you really want to speed up Monopoly, that is one of the ways to do it, because most of the properties will be sold by the time everybody gets around the board.
So The quickest way to speed up Monopoly is play by the rules.
To not play at all.
Actually, I would tell you the best. That's one thing to do. No money and free parking. Oh wait, that's in the rules too. So you're right. And the last thing is when the first player's eliminated, game ends. Count your money. Person with including property values and house values, and whoever has the most value wins. And that's the shortest way. You can get Monopoly done in an hour and a half. It's not a bad game.
Yeah,
I'm not going to say it's my favorite like it is yours, Shane, but Shane has the biggest collection of Monopoly of anybody in the gaming group.
I'm actually purging most of them.
Oh,
I don't know
they were gifts.
He decided that 3 minutes ago.
No. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but I played Monopoly a lot growing up and played with my mom before I really got into better gaming. And at some point, she started having the belief that I collected these games, Monopoly games, different, licensed and themed types. I only collected them because she kept buying them for me. So every Christmas, I get like 4 Monopolies. Like, thanks, Mom. And half of them are still packaged, but it's Monopoly. So you play it once, you don't really need to play all the different versions. It's the same game.
Give them to Goodwill, or are you gonna sell them on eBay? Because some of them might actually, if they're still in the shrink, they might be worth something.
No, they're not. But
eBay is another auction game.
Yeah, that's true. No.
Before we get too far afield,
several of them I'm giving to my nephews because there's like a Marvel one.
Oh, that's cool.
So they'll like that. So, but back to the auction part of Monopoly. I think anytime I've played with the auction rule, people go nuts and they'll pay like $500 for one of the first purple properties. So I think it speeds up the game because it gets them out on the board quicker, but also because people just spend more money.
gets rid of the money.
Because for some reason, people are like, if I can get this and it's not my turn, it's totally worth using all of this money, and it's never worth using all of that money.
Right. Once again, this is why eBay works.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So if you're a Monopoly fan, give me a call. I have some games to sell you.
You can contact us. Our email address is available at the end of the show.
All right, so we've done our obligatory Monopoly reference. So, what are some other games that have the auction mechanic, or do we want to define the mechanic?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
All right, so how would we define the auction mechanic, Frank?
So the auction mechanic. I'm going to ask for help here. Go ahead, Brent.
Does it require you to talk fast?
No.
Okay.
So when Frank was doing his intro, I was thinking of like going into an auction voice, but what came into my head was "Hey, better, hey, better, hey, better," and I was like, "No, that's what you say in baseball. That's not an auction." So.
Okay.
Anyway.
So, so there's a couple of ways that auctions take place. Basic simple auction is everyone has an opportunity to offer to pay. There's some item up for bid in the game. Could be a property like in Monopoly. Could be cards as in Dune. And one person will say, I'll pay $1 for that. And then it passes to the left and it can keep going up. Sometimes those auctions are one time around. We're going to go around once, which means that the last player's in somewhat of an advantage because they know what they can do. They know it's not going to go any higher. So they definitely don't have to try and raise the bid anything beyond what the last bid was. Sometimes they go around until everybody passes except the one bidder who's still in. Sometimes if you pass, you can't get back in. Sometimes if you pass, you can get back in. Sometimes there are blind bids where everybody will take whatever the money is of the game, stick it in their fist and put their fist over the table. When everybody's fist is over the table, everybody flips over their fist and reveals the money. So one of the games that is completely centered around the auction mechanic is Modern Art. And one of the things I like about Modern Art is it has a whole bunch. It has 4 different types, I think, of auction within that game. Depending on what you auction off, it tells you this is the method of auctioning you will use. And so it really mixes it up. And that actually makes it a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, sometimes sometimes I kind of get my shoelaces tied together, right? And we'll say, is this an auction game? But that's not really right. So Modern Art sounds like it's an auction game where auction is the main mechanic, main purpose of the game.
Yes.
But recognizing that there are other games, right, that have the auction mechanic, but we wouldn't necessarily call the main mechanic of the game, or we wouldn't call it an auction game. So I think sometimes in our discussions we get kind of mixed up in asking, is this an auction game? When really for us, that's not really the question. It's, does this utilize an auction mechanic?
I think that we've done that more than once. We've done it with other mechanisms too.
But while you were just talking, I was thinking of the game I was playing last night at game day. What was that? The one that you were talking about with the witches? Broom service. And there was one card in there that was an auction. So there's a card where in broom service you're flying around as a witch and you're dropping off potions to different towers and you have wands you can use for different things. And there's one card in that where everybody secretly held a certain amount of potions and wands, and then you revealed them, and whoever had the most got 10 victory points. So that was like a small auction mechanic in that game that I didn't, think about it being there, or even that type of thing being an auction. But it really was. We were auctioning our resources to get victory points.
Blind bid.
The thing I enjoyed most about that game, sitting at the other table, not playing it, was just listening to you guys go, I'm a cowardly weather witch.
Yeah. It is. You can't be like, I'm a coward. That game brought up a lot of anxiety in me. So we've talked about this one. In that game, you choose a role, and you can choose to be brave or cowardly. And if you choose brave, but somebody after you chooses brave, you don't get anything.
Yeah, that's each turn.
Because you were brave.
Each card you play. Yeah, absolutely. And man, I was getting anxious with that because you don't know what other people have. And
but if you play it cowardly, you'll get something regardless.
Just probably not what you want.
Okay. So
now that we've gotten off topic,
so the game game day was yesterday at our house. In case anybody hasn't figured that one out, and I actually played Traumfabrik, which is a German game. In America, it's known as Dream Factory. The idea is that you are bidding on movie stars and producers. You're also working to get cameramen and special effects, and all of these have a value, and they're based on how good they are. They have stars on them. And you're trying to put together the best movies. The difference between the German version is that it actually used real Hollywood movies, actors, that kind of thing. But they didn't have those licensed in America, so Dream Factory has parody names. Like there's a movie called The Golden Eye of the World Will Never End, which is, this mishmash of James Bond films. It was really good. I mean, part of it was Kay and I, my wife and I, like old movies, so the old movie part was appealing. But also the bidding, even though it was the same bidding every time, it was once a round, and if you passed, you could not get back in. Actually, it wasn't once a round; it was continual round until it's just one person left, and if you passed, you couldn't get back in. What made it really good was because I've got that lot of stuff. I need 2 actresses and a cameraman. And what that lot has is it has music, a producer, and special effects. I don't need that. I can bid it up a little bit just to drive up the bid and take more money out of it. And by the way, when you pay money, if I'm buying something, what I buy goes immediately to Shane and Brent. for instance. So if you can manage to drive things up, you can actually get more money out of people that way. So there's a direct impact. And that was just a lot of fun. I managed to bid up things one time. It was down to Keegan and I had him at 10. I really didn't want this lot. It was okay, but I didn't need it. I put the bid to 10 thinking, cause he needed it. I thought, I'm going to get him to spend 11 on this. And he bowed out, and I was stuck buying this stupid thing.
I think that's the big danger of the auction mechanic, right? Is trying to bid people up, but then getting stuck paying way too much for something you didn't want in the first place.
But that's the fun of it, in my mind.
Yeah,
Brent?
That depends on whether it's going to really ruin your game or not.
But you're in control. It's not like you got hosed by some die that rolls over and.
Are you really in control once the auction gets going?
Yeah.
Or are your emotions sometimes for
Well, that's why I thought Keegan was going to go to 11. Keegan was so pumped. He was like, and all of a sudden he went, no, I can't do that. Oh, are you serious?
No.
I'm not. I was trying to play you.
Maybe he was playing you.
I wondered. But it was so much fun. That game was fantastic. It really was.
Yeah.
So we're willing to say that auctions have a little bit of bluff and deception in them as well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I
think
guess
that's definitely
because I think this happens in every auction game we play. If someone tries to bid that up, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But someone tries to get someone else to pay for more money than they need to.
Yeah.
I think the best is when it's two people bidding it up and neither of them really want it. They're just trying to bid the other up because they think the other person wants it. So somebody's getting stuck. Somebody's getting stuck with it.
So that brings up the question, and I really struggled with this in the first couple rounds of Trump Fabrique. How do you know what an appropriate bid is, right? So there are some things. So this is a common complaint about modern art. So modern art is part of a trilogy that which includes Raw, Modern Art, and the third one escapes me at the moment. But they were all done, maybe it's Trump Fabrique, because they were all done by a guy named Reiner Knizia. That's the designer's name. All of these are really auctioning is the core mechanic. One of the complaints about modern art is that, so in modern art, you go around and you're bidding on these pieces of art, and at the end of each round, you're going to sell them. Okay, and you're really selling them to the bank. Thematically, you're selling them to collectors. You're just an art dealer. So you're going to sell them. And one of the complaints is you have no idea, because it varies based on how much in demand the artist is, and that's determined by how many auctioned off and blah, blah, blah. But you don't have a good idea. People say you don't have a good idea of what that value is going to be when you're going to sell it back. And I don't understand why they say that, because in my mind, you know what the maximum possible sellback is. Granted, you don't know where it's going to fall in the ranking, but you know what the maximum is. And so that gives you some frame of reference. That's the hardest part with a lot of auction games is how much is this really going to be? When do I stop? And without, of course, if it's so obvious everybody knows, it's not an auction game, because the person who really wants it's just going to take it to that ceiling and bid it, and it's over.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some question there. I find modern art to be very good. Modern art, I think, suffers in that the theme is not real strong, and so it doesn't have some of that feel to it like Trump Fabrique did.
Yeah. So do you think having some element of hidden information is essential to the auction mechanic working?
Either hidden information or different needs. So what made it different yesterday, and I'm going to start calling Trump Fabrique Dream Factory because I keep tripping over it. So in Dream Factory, what made the difference was I need 2 actresses for my movies right now where I'm at. I need two actresses, special effects, and music. You need a producer, special effects, and a guest star, and that's a separate. It's an actor and actress, but they're differentiated.
Yeah.
Because we need different things. We're not really gonna. If it comes down to just 2 of us, one of us is gonna take it or not.
Yeah.
Right. It's gonna be pretty much up. But because Brent needs some combination of those. He needs a little bit of each of that. Now it gets interesting because we all need different things. And you might just If it's one that really suits me, I'm going to pay more. Brent's going to be willing to pay some amount, but how much is he willing to pay? And you're just trying to drive up the price.
Yeah, I think one of the factors in these types of games or games with these mechanics that can be difficult is if I know the game really well and I need an actress, well, I might know that there's 3 more in that deck that have potential of coming up. But for somebody that's brand new to
and what their values are.
Yeah, but for somebody that's brand new to the game, you have no idea. So you might think that you have to get this one. And so I think that's where the auction mechanic can stumble a little bit is the difference between familiarities with the game of I might know exactly what's in that deck and what my probability of getting another of these cards is versus somebody who's never played before.
So moving off of auction specific games and moving to Power Grid, which we've all played and has the auction mechanism to get new power plants. That one has almost perfect information when you're looking at the auction piece.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what auctions are out there, what they can do. You might know what's in the deck, but you don't know that what's in the deck is going to be useful by the time it comes back up for you.
True.
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that one the needs might be different for people, but everyone's using the power plants the same way. It's just which resources they might want to use or not. And I would be tempted to say people are willing to switch fairly easily because it's not a big factor of the game.
Yeah, I'd say it's not necessarily different needs, but maybe different strategies.
So I do think that depends on the game. So modern art, pretty much all the art's worth the same. It's just based on how often it comes up. That's going to drive up its value or not.
Yeah.
But you're right. In Triumph Fabrique or even in Dune, where again, it's not an auction game per se, but there's an auction phase in it. If you know what's in which deck is that? The spice deck?
Item?
Item deck.
I can't remember. It's not
I don't remember
that.
what it's called.
At any rate, whatever that deck is called, if you know the makeup of that deck and you know what's come out, you have an idea of. But you're bidding on something blind in that one, aren't you? You're bidding on a card you haven't seen, only the Atreides have seen.
It's blind for some people, potentially not for others. So.
And that's what I think is interesting about Dune is that is a blind bid.
Well, it's a different kind of blind bid because it's not your bids are blind, but what you're buying is blind.
Right.
You're blind to that.
The bids are not blinded, so you actually have no clue if you're bidding on something worthless or not.
You're buying a card, but you may not know what that card actually is.
Yeah, it's like buying a lot on an estate sale, right? You have no idea what all is in there, but
and I think that deck stacked up about a quarter of them are useless cards, aren't they?
No.
It feels like half when I buy them. But it's like at least half of the deck is useless cards because it seems I buy those all the time.
Well, no, I think the reason it feels that way, though, is so often, you get poison defense. Well, that's not a useless card, but if the guy doesn't attack you with poison, it didn't make any difference then.
Yeah.
Right? So
I still think about a quarter of the cards are either cheap heroines or cheap hero
or Hodge.
Or
well, Hodge is not useless.
No, one of the worthless cards, and they actually say in the rules worthless cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's probably true.
You can potentially, at a fairly decent probability, get a worthless card when you're bidding blind.
Yes.
Yeah. So a game that we all really like too that uses the auction mechanic a little bit differently is Metropolis. So in Metropolis, you're not bidding for a card or a resource, but you're actually bidding for a territory in the city. And you're not bidding money, you're bidding your towers, right? So
of which you get one of each number.
Yeah, so you have 10 towers. 14 towers.
13.
And the higher the number, you get a certain amount of towers. The higher the number, the better the tower is. And it's better in 2 ways. One, the taller tower, higher number, obviously is going to win you bids. But then at the end of the game, you add up the most tallest towers. Oh, that's convoluted. Most tallest towers in one sector to determine who gets points for controlling that sector. So I really like this. I really like the auction mechanic in that game because as you're placing towers and people are kind of moving, this kind of tower snake around the board to figure out where you're going to end up, you don't necessarily know what direction the players are going to go. So you might be bidding towards a certain location, but then end up somewhere completely different because people have taken it a different direction.
So let's explain how that works a little bit, because what you're saying makes perfect sense if you've played the game or you understand. Because in Metropolis, and most of these games we're talking about, you're bidding on an item, or in Metropolis, you're bidding on spots on the board, but you're not bidding on the same spot. You are bidding. I'm going to put.
Yeah, Jason.
I'm willing to spend this much to get this territory. The next player can't pick that territory. They have to pick an adjacent territory and say, I'm willing to pay more for a territory adjacent to that. And so you actually, the auctioning walks across the map, the snake that Shane described. And sometimes it's not a matter of, sometimes it's, I want it to go in this direction, hope the bid gets back around to me and I can get that property I want. Sometimes it's, I want this property. Sometimes it's, I don't want this property. I have no interest. I mean, that is a very interesting one because you're not necessarily bidding on what you want to buy. You may be bidding just to keep the bid going so it gets to what you want to buy.
Yeah.
Or to get someone else off of what they want to buy.
That's true too. If you're playing that round's a defensive round for you, yes.
Well, and right, once a territory is taken, you can't then pass bids through that territory. So there's times where you can kind of corner certain territories off so that you can get them with just one bid.
Right.
So I really like that too, that you can kind of maneuver bids and maneuver controlled territories so that you're getting other territories you want for really, really cheap.
Right, because the territory, whoever wins the bid also starts the next bid. And so you can chain things by how much, depending if you're willing to pay enough, you can chain things together.
The only last type of bidding that I can think of, I'm sure it's not the only type of auction, is auctioning or bidding for turn order. So I think of the game Five Tribes, and in Five Tribes, you're not auctioning to see who goes first, but each player can pay a certain amount and up the player that paid before them to go earlier in the round. So in Five Tribes, there's a bunch of squares, and there's a bunch of little meeples, and you're picking up meeples on each square and dropping them one at a time as you go to end up on a certain square you want to end on with a certain color meeple. But in that game, before each turn, each player bids a certain amount of money to be able to go first in that turn. So is that considered an auction mechanic?
Sounds like it to me.
It sounds like it.
I've not played it.
I don't remember it. I did play it once with you. Is that a continuous, a once around, or is that a blind?
So it's once around, and so if I went first last time, I get first bid, and I can bid 0, 1, 3, 5, 8, 15. I think it might go one above 15. So I bid 3, and then Brandon, it's your turn. You can bid 5 to go before me, or you can bid 1 to go after me. So it's not fluid because there are fixed prices, but you can still determine how much you want to pay in order to go in a certain turn order.
So it's also not an increasing auction. It's a limited number of options.
Yeah.
So.
And
I would still call that an auction. It's just a kind of a unique one.
Right.
Yeah. In another game that you auction for turn order that I have that neither of you have played is Shakespeare. And in that, you actually bid how many actions you're going to take that turn, and whoever bids the lowest amount of actions gets to go first. So say Brent, you bid 3 actions, Frank, you bid 4, and I bid 2. I get to do less on my turn, but I get to do them first. So in that game, you're bidding how many actions you're taking each turn in order to determine what your turn order is.
And I'm assuming then that going first is definitely an advantage. And the reason I say that is because there are games where going last is definitely an advantage, where you want, because you're reacting to what the other players do, at least at some level.
Yeah, so in Shakespeare, there's multiple resources for purchase. You can buy costumes to put on your actors. You can buy set pieces to put on your stage, and then you can recruit actors or craftsmen. And so taking first turn order allows you to purchase those ones that you want before other players.
I generally find it interesting when it's more helpful to be the last player, though, than it is the first player. Because I think that in several of the games that do that, the turn order is variable by multiple or at least one element of the game itself. And so you're almost playing the game to become last for a while.
Yes. So Power Grid's a good example of that, right?
Yeah, because in Power Grid, if you're... Well, I don't know if that's being the last player helps. It's being the player with the lowest points, right? Because the player with the lowest points goes first. Not necessarily being the last.
It depends on what you're going on.
The player with the most points goes first, which means that for a lot of the phases, they go last because the phase is reversed.
Yeah,
order.
sometimes remember that you.
If you're confused,
sometimes you
I'm
go.
confused.
So when you.
And I've played this game a lot.
So remember in Power Grid, I can't remember which part it is, but it goes through players. Go
the
ahead.
auction starts at the first player, and then the resource buying and
Placing
of houses goes
in
reverse
reverse
turn
order.
order.
Yes,
So it's based on the person who's in last position at that point.
and then there's another phase that goes back in regular order, right? Or at least there is in Power Grid, the card game.
There is. I think that's the collection phase, though.
Oh,
is just
so it
taking
doesn't
money.
really matter
Right.
what the
It's-
turn order is. The other thing that happens in some of these games, Power Grid's one of them, Dune's one of them, where there's going to be multiple auctions. We're going to auction off a set of things one at a time, and if you have bought one, you can't buy a second one.
Yeah.
So if you are going last, you can drive up the price on the early ones if you're good. You can drive, or your opponents
Lucky.
are naive.
Yeah.
You can drive up the price. They'll overspend, and then when it gets to your turn, they can't buy anything because they've already bought something, and you can buy something super cheap because you're the only person bidding. So you bid as low as possible and take it.
So Power Grid sticks you. Also, if you don't, because you have to open a bid if it's your turn, and if no one else bids on that,
You're stuck. Yes.
So it also has that function in it, which is I think fits into what you're talking about. Where if you're the last player to bid, you had the most potential options
Well,
of
and if
what
you-
you wanted to choose.
And if you
That's right.
pass on your turn, you'd get nothing. You can't bid on anything else
Right.
that entire round. So
Yes.
yeah, I think that is that kind of goes into that like bluffing and kind of gaming the people and gaming
Yeah.
the game part
There's
too of trying to get convincing other people they need this so that then later you can get
Yes.
what you want for you.
There's definitely a psychological element to
in Power
these
Grid
kinds of games.
saying like you already have trash, so why not buy that trash Power Factory?
Yeah.
Because that would be great for you. And
it
then you're
doesn't
like
really give you
then you're like
anything
hoping a good power plant comes up for you.
Right. And yeah, sometimes all you want to really do is turn over what's out there, right?
Yeah.
Hoping that something better for you comes up.
Hope that ecological one comes up when you're the only bidder.
Yes.
For me, it never does. It's a worse one. So today we talked about some of these auction games and games with auction mechanics. We think it's a really interesting mechanic. You know, Brent and I haven't played, modern art in some of these games where, auction is the main mechanic, but we definitely enjoy Power Grid, Dune, Metropolis, these games where it's utilized in the greater gameplay. So we encourage you to find a game with this auction mechanic, try it out, see what you think. I think we would probably recommend, if you're into gaming and you've gotten familiar with games, Power Grid is probably one of the best auction mechanics out there for us. So
I would recommend Dream Factory. I really
Dream
would.
Factory.
It
There you
was
go.
it was not complicated rules wise, but it was a lot of fun.
And if you're not into the heavier games, at least play Monopoly with the auction so that it's faster.
there you go. Get out there, auction it off, play some games, live a good life.
And
Thanks for listening.
bring other people to the podcast.
Peace out. I don't know why I actually threw up a peace sign.
This has been the Analog Gamers Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please spread the word about our podcast, which can be found at theanaloggamers.libsyn.com. You can email us at theanaloggamers@gmail.com or find us on Facebook as The Analog Gamers. Our intro and outro are recorded by Daniel Feldman. Logo artwork provided by Tabitha Jordan Nichols. The Analog Gamers Podcast is licensed under Attribution, No Commercial, Non-Derivative, Creative Commons 4.0 license.